class people in Britain, this is not a new issue, the cost of living crisis. But with the recent hikes in prices, particularly for energy and food, it's clear that things are going to get worse for more and more of us. In 2019, before the COVID pandemic arrived, the Rowntree Foundation already calculated that in-work poverty had grown to 17% of the working family population. And they stated one of their highlights in their report, if you like, the headline statements was that billions of pounds in state support had enriched private landlords, but 1 in 6 working households faced poverty. That was a situation before the pandemic, and with all of these price rises and the increase in national insurance and a whole host of other things, the situation is going to get much worse.
Right, thank you, Dave. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Andy Ford. I'm a Unite union rep in the health service. Been a rep for 20 years. I'm chair of the Northwest Health Committee of Unite. So I follow what goes on in Unite, but my experience is in public sector, not private sector. And the unions, of course, are a big part of the response to this rising in prices. And really, we're in the calm before the storm, you could say. We know the cap is going to go off the energy prices. They're going to go up by 50%. And for lots of people, that will be devastating because there's a huge number of people who are just working on the margins. That's been the economy that's been constructed over the last 20 years of lots and lots of people at minimum wage or just above, no savings, in and out of work. There's all that. As well as the energy prices, food. I mean, Jack Monroe, the food blogger, did a great job of exposing the fake figures. The CPI is always 1 or 2% less than the RPI, which is a measure used right up until recent times. But Jack Monroe pointed out that the inflation rate on basic foodstuffs is higher than both. We had Marcus Rashford. Because of the inadequacy of the Labour opposition, these sorts of honest but accidental figures arise to catch the mood and put into words what people are feeling. There could be an interest rate rise coming our way, almost certainly. That'll affect mortgages. And then there's the national insurance hike as well, which I was amazed to see that the Daily Mail are now running a campaign called Spike the Hike, obviously trying to maintain some base for their readership. So it's all coming, and it hasn't hit yet, and there will be major effects on what happens. And what's happened so far is Johnson has been able to spin himself out of almost anything with his tame press. They put a different slant on everything, given Starmer's idea of opposition, which is to agree with almost everything. That's helped Johnson spin things into something different to what they were. But he can't do that with the fact that people won't have enough food to heat their houses and to buy the foods that they want, and they're struggling in every way they turn. That can't be spun out with a few newspaper headlines about the Ukraine or Boris takes personal charge of. I think Private Eye points out that that's been a Tory party headline for about 30 occasions. Boris takes personal charge of borders, COVID, whatever it might be. So it can't be spun. And what's going to happen is inflation is predicted at 7.25%, which none of us have been used to in recent times. It's been static, 0.5. That is actually the highest since 1991. And prices are rising worldwide due to the supply chain failures, which was brought to the surface by that ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal. It's the end of a whole system developed by Toyota and imitated by others of this just-in-time production, that you don't carry stocks, you just order it in, you whip your suppliers down to the lowest price possible, lowest margins possible. So there's very little resilience in the world supply chains. And also there's been a huge creation of money. Rishi Sunak's created £450 billion in the pandemic. He's created several times over that with quantitative easing. So a lot of money washing around. Not much of it finds its way to us, but it has inflated asset prices, property, shares, billionaires, hedge funds, and all that sort of thing. So that also does inherently leads to inflation at some point if you print or nowadays create money on a computer. So what's predicted, the biggest fall in household income ever since records were kept. It's going to be worse than 2008 or 9. It's going to be worse than 92. And it comes on top of 20 years of squeezing of working class incomes as the trade unions were deliberately penned in and shackled with the anti-union laws. It's very, very rare for unions to mount a successful pay claim and to win it. You did well if you were keeping pace. Sunak's taken a panic measure on the energy prices of this weird loan, which even Martin Lewis was denouncing in no uncertain terms. I think he caught the mood, the idea that you're forced to borrow £200 to help rather than the energy companies' profits being capped, no, they're just carrying on with the so-called free market. And even France and Germany, Norway have done better. I think France, EDF has been capped at 4% in France, but they're going to recoup the losses in Britain. And there's a lot of these lessons won't be lost on people. So the ruling class, of course, are ruling out price controls because you can't buck the market, to quote Margaret Thatcher. But wage controls have now come in to be discussed by the Bank of England director and others. He only earns £500,000 a year. He's telling people they can't have wage increase because he's worried for them if they set off a wage price spiral. The research is that wage demands follow price rises, they don't cause them. And the thinking of many Marxist economists is that high wages don't necessarily lead to price rises, they cut into profits. The only place they automatically lead to price rises is in monopolised or near monopolised sectors. But in general, the competition, and it's worldwide competition, you've got the internet fueling all that it will cut into profits. But if profits fall, that's part of the crisis of British capitalism, because the crisis of British capitalism is low investment. If profits are low, they won't invest. If investment's low, you get low productivity. That's the curse of the British economy. And I was walking through my local shopping centre at the weekend, and you just see empty shop after empty shop with a low-paid shop worker in there playing on their mobile phone, and it typifies the unproductive nature of the British economy. You can pay the minimum wage, it's insignificant compared with the cost of rent. They're not selling much, they're not producing much, and they're just, you can see a good dozen shops with no customers, just someone playing around on the mobile phone. And although the government and their Tory papers talk about this bounced back economy and growth rates, this growth rate, that, the truth is that Britain is the sick man of Europe. Our recovery is the second worst. Bank of England predicting 1% growth, more or less stagnation. That's including £25 billion bung to the companies in corporate tax cuts, and the IMF are predicting stagnation in the UK for 2023, and that will have political effects. Young people won't be able to get jobs, or they'll get low paid jobs. Those people in work will find the bosses saying, oh, we can't afford to do right by you. So it sets the scene for conflict, really. But I would say on the political effects, with Starmer, I think forget it. I'm sure everyone will agree. He just doesn't, it's not in him, is it? I mean, I post something on the Facebook group of Steve Reed saying he's got a law and order thing, war on drugs with the flag, more police on the beat. So that's just laughable policy. We've all heard that before. It's what every politician says, from Tories to Liberals, and now it's the front bench of the Labour Party. But on the other hand, My Uni Unite is reporting double-digit pay rises for people almost every day of the week. And the buses is a big one, lorry drivers, logistics, some engineering companies, some pharmaceutical and chemicals. The highest pay rise I know of that our union got was 41% for some lorry drivers, 28% another place. The Liverpool docks, I think they got 4.5%, although the company said they couldn't afford any more. And there's a big mood on there to do more. So I think you can see that. But significantly not in civil and air transport. That's more or less that, you know, with the pandemic, everyone's afraid of their jobs and it's not going to happen. Construction, the union's so weak in construction, unbelievably, that there almost isn't a union presence except on the big sites like the Nike sites. So we did see the Scunthorpe scaffolders, and there's a plant in Teesside where there's a walkout. So the union has a presence on these big sites, but the massive construction, 2 million people, is more or less not unionised. And health, where I am, that's been left behind. Education, local government, we're all stuck on 1%, 2%, 3% deals, which the officials negotiate for us. But we have to be honest, none of the unions could muster a credible pay campaign in the NHS. We actually worked it out. We put in a claim for 15% because it is what we deserve in objective mathematical fact. It's very, very difficult to interest the members in that. And the mood was, well, it's not going to work. We tried strike action, it didn't work. And there's two sides to it. The anti-union laws more or less are designed to rule out the big set-piece one-day strikes like we saw in 2010, 11, 12. But on the other hand, the members remember the shameful sellout of the 2012 pension strike, where Unison and the TUC leaders created a deal which was no better than what everyone went on strike for in the first place. And as a result, everyone's paying very, very high pension contributions, worse pensions. That has affected younger people. Say, well, the unions, they don't differentiate between United and Unison. It didn't work, but things are going to bear down upon them, and they will have to, they can't just walk away and say, tolerate. Also, in the health service thing, everyone's shell shocked from COVID, to be honest. So the interesting thing will be what happens the next pay round. So look at the other unions. The smaller unions are more responsive, the RMT, the bakers. I put PCS question mark because they led the charge in 2012, but they're very, very quiet and not much coming on out of Marks and Watkin. You do hear from activists in PCS that it's not the union it was, and there's some poor deals been recommended. We've got the CWU, of course, they're in a single, their benchmark is what goes on in Royal Mail, and that seems to have brought some peace at the moment. But even Usdaw and Community, who are very bureaucratic unions, they've run strike ballots, amazingly enough. Community, I think the General Secretary's got a medal or something. The GMB, which is a right-wing union, they've run quite a few ballots and got quite a few good results. I can remember the Eastbourne bin strike that they put forward. Nothing from Unison, but then they're almost exclusively public sector and part of these huge national deals covering hundreds of thousands of workers, very bureaucratic. The teachers, it's a big union, but not hearing anything too much off them at the moment. It's like we could go into it in the discussion. It's like a collapse of the people who were known as the awkward squad back in 2012. They're some of the unions which have gone into almost hibernation now. It's as if I think really it's an ideological thing. They're just not sure what to do. And the non-union sectors are getting left behind. The care sector, small firms, of course, they pay for that with a massive turnover, skills shortages. They can't make it up as easily with immigration now, as they've fallen victim to the Great Resignation, which is also an economic phenomenon as well. If people can, as NHS drivers who've packed in their jobs, got a 5,000 pay rise by just going over to a logistics company delivering internet parcels. So there's all that going on in the economy. There's an interesting case in Salford. You can read about it in is it Tribune or Jack? I think it's Tribune, where there's a left-wing Unison branch which has been transformed to right to left, cooperating with the Corbyn Council, and they've actually Unison branch organised the care sector, then went to the Corbyn Council and said, you need to do more. They pressurised the companies, and the companies had to give in. As a result, giving in Salford, there's pay rises across the country in that sector, and they've calculated at £19 million more going into care workers' pockets as a result of what's happened in Salford. I think it's in Tribune. So inflation is going to kick in big time. We're already where we are with all these strike ballots going in, or certainly from some unions and some sectors. Workers will expect their unions to act, or they might join or form other unions like the United Voice of the World, the anarchist unions, United Voice of the World or the IWW. They've organised Uber drivers, Deliveroo. So there's always a way that people find a way to exert their will. In the health service, though, we're not having big set piece strike ballots. People are agitating for better overtime, for regrades, because that's the avenue which is easy to pursue. And the unions must respond or die. And I've said this in Unite. The last 10 years have been a classic case in Unite of not fixing the roof when the sun is shining. When COVID came, it ran through some of our sectors, like rampaged and wrecked them, lost members everywhere. And I said to people in Unite, the officers, we've got to respond, or else we won't pick up the members that we need to be successful. And no union has a right to exist. If you look at UCAT, that's firmly under control of the construction union. It's firmly under control of the right wing. They did nothing. End up in financial collapse. And when they merged with our union, it turned out each officer in UCAT was only looking after 1,200 members. And that's not sustainable. You can't pay the official salary of £45,000-50,000 a year out of 1,200 members. So they had, in the end, they had to shamefacedly collapse into Unite to save the officials' jobs. And that union doesn't exist anymore. When it turned out their membership was ex-local authority, few motorway service people and scattered individuals. It had been destroyed, and now it doesn't exist. So I just finished off on the effect on the Labour Party, because we have been saying in Left Horizons that the unions are the key to the Labour Party. The unions pay for it all. They deliver, they deliver resources at election times. So I'll just lay out three possibilities for the Labour Party. I am sure we can debate, but I'm sure that the unions will respond to the pressures on the working class, because they have to. So if they transform and go to a more fighting position, as we might be seeing in Unison, what will be the effect in the Labour Party? So you can see, if the Blairites succeed in totally insulating the Labour Party from union influence, the Labour Party would be like in Scotland, 14%. It would just die off. I think John quoted Harold Wilson, the Labour Party needs two wings to fly. And I think that's, I have to find out where he said that. Or he could have a 1931 development, couldn't he, where Starmer gets elected, but the unions won't. You can be sure they won't like what Starmer does in power, and they could take the best elements of the Labour Party with them and be like the Labour Party in 1931, 1932, which is one reason I'd say this to people, to stay in the Labour Party, no matter how bad it looks, because the Communist Party walked out of Labour in 1928, the ILP walked out in 1930, and then just a short time later they had this massive upheaval. And then the third possibility is, the classic transformation as discussed by militants and Ted Grant. The Labour Party would be transformed and retransformed under the pressure of events. I don't think it's as simple as that anymore, because the transmission belts from the unions to the Labour Party are quite damaged and degraded compared with those times. So very few CLPs have trade union delegates attending. The influence at region is through the TULO. It's very, very indirect away from the members. And even then, the bureaucracy, a lot of powers it wield against the trade unions. And then nationally at the conference, it's all unofficial backroom deals. So the transmission belts from the unions into the Labour Party is not as clear cut as they used to be. And even within the unions, the transmission belt from the members to the officials, again, is quite degraded, where if you take my own union, Unite, 1/3 of the branches don't meet and 1/3 of officers over retirement age. It's not a pretty picture, and that's all an effect of the deindustrialization of Britain and the attack on manufacturing. It was bound to have an effect. But I think events are happening and they will have their effects. How exactly it works out is down to us to study very closely at each stage of the process.
One of the things we noticed in COVID in Britain was how nothing was put in place until the friends of the Tories were set up to make a profit out of it. This business about the energy increases, which is all speculation, with people who buy oil and sit on it, buy gas and sit on it until the price rises. And one of the things I noticed about it is that the £200 that Andy referred to is not going to be put into people's bank accounts. It's a subsidy to the energy companies, and they will get that money, and then people will have to spend the next 2 or 3 years, paying that off on top of the bills they will already have. Meanwhile, the company that gets the subsidy so they can not raise the annual bill of customers by £200 will be making interest on it. It's crazy. And this is the same thing, the cost of living, and I see it in members of my own family. I've got kids who are in their 40s who still don't own houses because they can't get onto the property ladder, and they're working as nurses and whatever. One of my daughters is paying now. Northern Ireland's supposed to be a low rent area. One of my daughters has just moved into a house which is paying £800 a month for an old half-derelict farmhouse. So you can have individual strikes for wage increases, but what you're doing is you're saying that's okay, society can stay the way it is, these people can rip us off and we'll just get more pay and give it to them. That's not the answer. We have to have another answer to this.
Thanks. Yeah, I thought I might just give a bit of feedback from National Education Union. I'm a local officer, I'm national officer as well as the National Education Union, and we have got a pay campaign at the moment. It sits as part of a wider, what we're calling an orientation, rather than a campaign, because it's going to be our focus for the next couple of years around a lot of issues that are wrong with education, but there is a specific element around pay. So we've just recently come out doing what we call a structured test, a survey of our teacher members around their pay, and I'll be honest, I went to some members' meetings and it was a bit of a difficult sell. Bearing in mind teachers, yes, absolutely feeling the pinch. And I'll tell you, I am well feeling the pinch. I've got 3 teenagers at home and I'm at the top of my pay scale. On a 4-day week, I dropped 1 day to manage my work-life balance, and I am really struggling. Financially. I dread to think what would happen if the car or the boiler went, because I've got nothing at the end of the month. However, our members are in schools working with children, young people every day who are in families who are far worse off than we are. And so for us to come out on a pay campaign, it has been difficult to sell to members. I agree with what Andy said about it being a political choice. It is a public sector job. The money is there. We know that the money is there for government to have given us a decent pay rise. I think we have to be a little bit careful, because I know when I speak to people, family and friends, there's a bit of an element of public sector versus private sector. People say to me, well, you worked all the way through, you got wages all the way through, yeah, that's absolutely correct. but I've seen my wages in real terms declined by 17% over the last 10 years. That makes it very difficult. Trade union laws, you know, this is why we've done a survey at this stage. We are really, really clear as a union. We showed our strength very much last year with the Section 44 and what we were able to do with that. The last thing we want to do at this stage is then to go for a strike ballot and for it to be unsuccessful, because that is not the message that we need to be sending out. Although there are elements of our union who would like us to do that and they think it's an important way just to send a message. I totally disagree with that. We're really keen to work with the wider trade union movement, other groups such as the People's Assembly. There is absolutely a movement coming as everybody feels that pinch. So we are asking for 8%. There's reasons behind that to do with what they've already said, that are going to increase the new teachers coming into the profession and somewhere between what we think we deserve and what we've needed. Our survey came back, we kind of got 28.46 exactly turnout, so nowhere near what we need for a successful ballot. But however, we are out on strike in a group of independent schools at the moment, and we absolutely smashed that threshold there, and that's around pensions, the threat to remove them out of the teachers' pension scheme, which is something that's like really important for the entire movement, I think. I'll just tell you what we're doing. Rather than campaigning with a strike ballot, we're campaigning in different ways. We've got days of action coming up going forward, which will be organised locally. I've just come off of a call with our councillors network and governors network, so we've got set motions for councillors to take to their local councils to kind of talk about pushing government for a decent pay rise and a decent education recovery funding as well. We'll be presenting our evidence to the STRB. The next pay award will be for the next 2 years, so it is an important one. But most importantly, building our rep density. You know, we got some really good data, some really good information from that survey. We asked some key questions of people: would you be involved in doing this? Would you be involved in doing that? And we need to follow up. We grew in membership because of COVID and due to what we did in Section 44, and we really need to keep those members active because we really need to be strengthening. And just very briefly, I'll finish, like the TUC are organising as well, they very much are. And, you know, the smaller unions, ones that you wouldn't expect to be saying, no, we need to be out on the streets, such as like the Royal College of Midwives. However, Height Unions Week, and I will finish by saying what we really need to be aware of is our non-unionised workers, and we need to be, everybody after this call, go out and ask somebody to join a union, whatever union that is. Thanks.
I work for the University and College Union. I'm a full-time official. We're currently engaged in 10 days of strike action in relation to our ongoing pensions dispute. I don't really want to discuss that because I've done a lead off and I'll just bore everyone again. But what I do want to say is, but in terms of wider union activity within the education sector, there's an indicative ballot going out to all of our FE branches over the next few months. And FE, I mean, the pensions issue in HE is massive. People are looking at losing £250,000 out of their pension if it goes through as UK want it to go through. But if we look at what's happening in FE, we've got members of staff who in real terms have lost over 20% of their wage over the last 10 years. And it's not getting any better. What we're getting in regards to pay claims through the majority of our branches is 1%. And in some instances, employers aren't even willing to give that. So we've got those indicative ballots going out over the next few months. I'm also a member of Unite on the executive committee of our branch. And I think what's happening in Unite is really important and really significant. We've got Sharon Graham and we've got the bin strikes in Coventry. We've got Sharon Graham stopping all funding in the Midlands whilst the Labour Council is refusing to negotiate and come to a resolution with the bin strikes. And what she's also said is if this continues, I'm paraphrasing now, so this won't be entirely correct, but if this continues, we'll consider all our funding to the Labour Party. Now, I don't know how this circle's going to be squared, because clearly there's going to be resistance from the Labour Party to resolve this, because we don't want to give in to Sharon Graham and the unions. And clearly there's going to be a whole host of, over the next few months, few years, there's going to be loads of industrial action against Labour councils from Unite. So I don't know how this is going to end, but I do think there's a significant chance for Unite will disaffiliate from the Labour Party over the next few years, and the implications of that are massive. So just making that point really, but I'd like to get Andy's opinion on that also, and I'll stop my contribution there.
Yeah, on that last one, I'm a member of Unite Community, and I've just been elected branch chair, and I'm very keen that we get our members, our non-employed members, actually working hard to support people who are in dispute, and in fact to help to organise unorganised workers. But the point I wanted to raise is sort of a side issue, possibly. You asked about experiences from how it affects young people, but I want to go to the other end. The Tories, of course, have broken the triple lock. You know, they promised they would maintain the triple lock on pensions, which would be the highest figure of was it 2.5%, or CPI, or the average wage increases, and that was I think it was September. That was the date where that was determined. Well, of course, that was just as some COVID restrictions were being lifted, and there was an enormous surge, a relatively enormous surge in pay increases. I think it was 8.1% was the average pay increase at that time. And Therese Coffey said it would be grossly unfair for pensioners to get that sort of increase. I mean, of course, our pensions have been eroded over the years in spite of the triple lock, and I think it's quite likely that we will end up somewhere around about 3% in April, which of course is going nowhere near. Now, I'm quite lucky in my personal circumstances in that I'm mortgage free now, and I've got a couple of small pensions to supplement my state pension. But there are quite a lot of other people who are not in such a fortunate position as that. A hell of a lot of other people who are not in as fortunate position as that. And in fact, the projected rate of inflation is going to knock me down from being reasonably comfortable to being sort of on the borderline of struggling. Yeah, I'd like to sort of think, and I know actually, judging by the shine on the heads of quite a few of our contributors, that there's quite a few of us who are probably in pretty much the same position. So as I say, I would say working through Unite Community, working through Unite retired members and other unions which have retired member sections. I think we ought to be looking to link that particular struggle.
I couldn't bear to watch it the other night, but you had Sorry We Missed You, which was a fantastic movie, but I couldn't bear to watch it again. But it was on. I don't know if anybody saw it. But the reason I mention it now is I recently, just the other day, yesterday I think, saw a video produced by the CWU, and about that is some Valentine's Day themed video about some guy whose love life is being ruined by his boss constantly changing his hours over and treating him badly, and like telling him what a marvelous video this was. It was absolutely exactly the sort of thing that the union should put out. I don't know if anybody else saw it, but it's brilliant. I was amazed by it, and we want more of that, please. Just on the NEU, I mean, just to back up what Louise said, we've got an independent school, not part of the dispute that Louise was talking about, but another independent girls' school. And it's extraordinary. Like this is one of those schools where you've got like a half a mile drive to get to the porticos. You know, it's like a ridiculously expensive school, and yet they tried to take away the school pensions from NEU. And I think what's likely to happen in the next few weeks is I don't think this has happened since the dinosaurs roamed the earth. You've actually got the NEU and the NASUWT coming out at the same time, which is almost unique in my experience. So that's good. That was a question of pensions as well. The school was taking away the pensions. So we've got a possibility of a school strike. Of course, very recently, up until I think November, you had, I was involved regularly on the picket line of a dispute which had gone on from July to November, of teachers, literally 3-day week strikes for months and months and months. I think the longest strike that's ever been in the NEU or the NUT previously, I think. So there was certainly a fight back, and it's because, you know, people just can't manage. People just literally cannot manage. And also the conditions at work are very bad anyway. So people feel humiliated and stressed, but they also just can't manage. They literally can't manage. Even myself, I live on a 12,000 a year kind of pension, which is a really good pension in the scheme of things. But I'm now taxed on it where I wasn't before. My gas is getting more expensive. Okay, I have somewhere to live. The interest rates don't bother me, but life is getting harder for pretty much everybody. But for young people, it's ridiculous. I mean, you had this controversy with the Kirsty woman, the property developer woman on TV. Location. She said, "Oh, any young people can afford to save up for a deposit if they just give up avocado on toast and Costa coffees or something." Whereas when she bought a house, the average house was about 3 times the average salary. Now it's like 10 or 14 times the average salary, depending on which part of the country you're in. So young people look at that, and it's almost a kind of a hopelessness sets in, which really needs to which we need to channel into more progressive views. Just locally as well, at the local hospital, there's a dispute, a Unite-led dispute with a group of outsourced workers in Serco, catering staff, cleaning, security staff, and they've been on strike for 2 weeks, and they're going to have a break and then be on strike for another 2 weeks. It just made me laugh at the picket line the other day. How often do you get kind of centrist, allegedly feminist women? She said, "Oh, well, the trade union movement is so male and white and so reform." I don't know how many picket lines you've been on recently, but this picket line is wall to wall African women dancing from 5 o'clock in the morning till 11 in the morning, and it's a fantastic experience to go on this picket line. Just to finish off, really, just to say, there's been, if you follow sort of some of the strike map and some of these things on Facebook, there's been dozens and dozens of smaller victories led by Unite. Like literally, they threatened the industrial action and they get what they want. So there is a fight back. There is genuinely a fight back sort of burbling under. But I just want to address some of the points about unions and the Labour Party, because I don't think that the Unite certainly are not going to leave the Labour Party. I can see they can cut back their financial contribution to nothing, but why would you give up that influence in the party when you can just maintain the influence by paying the bare affiliation, and then you can pay all the other political fund money into other, where would they go if they left the Labour Party? They're not going to sponsor Tusk, are they? So I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Unite will only go if there's another party to go to. And I think and I'll finish on this point, Dave, sorry. If there is a movement amongst the rank and file of trade unions, which will be reflected in the leadership of trade unions, even against the will of most of the leaders, let's be honest, although probably not in Sharon Graham's. If it's reflected amongst the leadership, then at the national level, or NEC level, in policy level, the Labour Party will have to respond to this. But I think that the trade unions at NEC and national level will be forced. They'll force Starmer into taking up more and more positions. Or if Starmer refuses to take up those positions, then there'll be splits and fissures and problems at the top of the party, and it'll be just a general kind of another part of the struggle. So I think rank and file militancy will be reflected at the top of the Labour Party. And I don't think Unite or any of the really big unions are ever going to leave. Why give up that power for nothing?
I believe it's the case that it could be the most serious fall in living standards for over 30 years. That's what I've read. And I think everything's going to have consequences. We've already seen that internationally, haven't we? In maybe confused movements. Canada's a situation. In France, there's been protests about fuel rises. I think it's inevitable. There's going to be a fight back, protests, and of course, its organised expression to be within the trade unions. In my old industry, bus industry, I've never seen so many ballots for strike action. Now, a lot of these didn't materialise, mainly because the employers didn't grant concessions. I think that point's already been made. There was some, I thought, comments which I did want to take up regarding the situation with the Labour Party. Now, I joined Labour Party back in 1975, and I remember the GC meetings in those days. There was very little participation from the unions. A couple of retired guys in the unions would attend GC meetings. So it's not exactly something new. The actual active participation, even under the Corbyn movement on the local level, very little participation. But that will change. One of the things is the employers will resist at some point, and it will show that the trade union action alone will not solve workers' problems. And I think that's when the political side will more likely to develop. Ultimately, that's the problem with Graham. That was her platform, wasn't it? Get back to trade union activity. No, we don't want this connection. It was a criticism of McCluskey, the fact that the role he played. It will be shown that trade union activity alone will not solve workers' problems. In fact, now as far as passivity at the moment, there's comments about can't get support this stage in the public sector unions, but that will change. I recall when the Labour government, by the way, had pay restraint, and it lasted for some years. And people would say, oh, they won't keep getting away, and they did. But at a certain point, it stopped. There will be a reaction. So I think we shouldn't be too pessimistic about. I think that's where the big strikes will take place in the public sector, because the private sector is good. Trade union membership is relatively low. I think that was starting to develop a growth in the trade unions. At some stage, once there's been successes, it encouraged people to see the need to be in a trade union. So I don't think we should be too pessimistic by both the involvement of the trade unions within the Labour Party at the present time, which in my experience has been the case anyway for the last 45 years since I was a member. And but we should see things as they are at the moment, or what we're likely to be in the future.
I think, as Mark has just said there, we haven't seen a cost of living crisis in 30 years. And you do have to go back, I think, to the early Thatcher years when inflation was running right out of control. I remember that 16%, I think it went way up to above 20% before it came back down again. And inflation is always very important to control in the capitalist system. If there's one thing they do not want to happen, and that is a cost of living crisis or an inflation crisis that is out of control, it stabilizes capitalism. So it's very important for the capitalist system. They always like a little bit of inflation, but that's all, nothing like what we have here today. I think we should try to identify what has caused this. And it comes down predominantly to one sector, oil and gas, energy. It's not that long ago, but a year ago, a barrel of oil was running at about $40. In fact, a little before that, about 2 years ago, there was such a glutton of oil that the oil companies were actually paying to have it stored. It was a virtually zero. Today, a barrel of oil is just under $100. And oil, just let's leave global, the greenhouse gases out for a minute. That's an entirely different argument. We are so dependent on oil and gas, not only to heat our homes, but effectively for everything we do. And I do mean everything we do. It affects everything. And on the energy crisis, the oil comes from abroad. The OPEC companies have deliberately curtailed production. And I know there's been appeals by America and Britain for them to increase it. They haven't. And it is that lack of supply and demand that is causing this crisis here at the moment. It is why the oil companies, as we saw BP, that has got one of the largest profits they've had now for over a decade, £12 billion that they have made in annual profits. And of course, the problem with the system is that this government in particular can't go after the money. These are corporations. Perhaps Keir Starmer, as the Labour Party said, a windfall tax, maybe they would have done that. But that wouldn't have, again, what would that bring in? Perhaps a few £billion, whatever, that too wouldn't solve the problem. This is the big problem. One energy, one sector can cause this crisis. And as Marcus pointed out and others have pointed out, it's not in Britain, it's right across the globe. It's in the capitalist countries. The situation in America, they've got inflation running away up, I think it's over 9% now. And at the moment, right throughout Europe as well, and at the moment, there is no short-term solution to this. The governor of the Bank of England, when he was talked about and asked about the increase in interest rates, it quite clearly made that this is going to last He thinks throughout this year, perhaps next year. There's no short-term solution to this at all. In Britain, I think Andy pointed out that they do have particular problems, and that is our starting point. We are one of the lowest wage economies in Europe. People living on subsistence, even before this crisis, people in full-time employment cannot live on the wages that they're currently earning. But I think the problem in Britain goes beyond that, because not only that, we cannot fill the jobs that are required in manufacturing, in retail, and also, of course, public services. There aren't the jobs there. That's partly to do with Brexit, because of this racist policy of what the government has since they've left the European Union and the free movement of people. That's partly the problem. There simply is a lack of employees to take up the jobs. If you look at manufacturing, I've got a manufacturing plant a few miles from where I live. They make trailers. They need 20 skilled manufacturing jobs, engineers, 20 for that one factory alone, and they cannot get them. What they're now doing, or forced to do, is they're now going to employ and train a manufacturing jobs specifically for their own employment. They're doing it. They're paying for the education, the training, everything. It's no longer done by the education and training. It is not doing anything to address the real issues of what the country needs in education and training for the future. So skilled jobs, and of course it's the shortages. We've talked about, as many of the contributions have said, about strikes and for wage increases. That on its own is not going to solve the problem. In fact, that on its own will probably exacerbate the problem, because when you have increased wages, and they are going up, the National Statistics Office have said that they're running at about 4.3% in the last 3 months. Inflation is slightly higher than that. So wages are going up. They're forced to go up, because for employers to keep their workforce and to attract more work, they have no other choice. They're increasing the wages. The problem with this is increased wages, along with all the other increases in transport and energy and so on, is going to fuel into the sector again. And that on its own is going to continue to push inflation up and further up. It's not going to solve the problem in any long-term basis. I think the question, and I'll finish on this point, is, what do we need to do? I think if we had had a Corbyn government, the energy corporations and companies would have been nationalised now. I do believe that Labour would have seen through to that. And that would have been a huge step. Wouldn't have solved the problem, because the energy is an international body, OPEC. But it certainly, as far as concerned here, I think it would have helped. We need, I think, an incomes policy, and a policy that all workers should have a worker's wage, an average worker's wage for all workers that is index linked. And I think that's an incomes policy is something we don't have. Boris Johnson leaves it open to the market. He lets the market decide what people's wages are actually going to be. We need an incomes policy for this country, and I think that's the one off. Apart from that, it's the nationalisation of the corporations is what we need, but it needs serious intervention now from the government to keep these prices down. That, to me, is the essence of how we're going to get the problem solved. This government's not going to do it. It's going to be the market. We're in for the long haul.
Yeah, it's Steve Jones from the, I'm sitting on the CW's national executive, and I'll concur with Ray. What a wonderful video that is. I think somebody's put it on the chat. We did get a preview of it at Congress House when we had all our reps down last Thursday, and I was almost dreading it because I wasn't sure what was going to come out of a Valentine's Day advertisement, but it really does hit the spot, I think. So it's worth looking at. Look, from the CW's point of view, in relationship to the Labour Party, our position, notwithstanding that we've got a general conference taking place in April, is to remain inside the party. We've reduced our funding to the bare minimum, which is the affiliation fee, and we will be using our political fund where we see is most appropriate for the movement and our members. The position that we're taking in relationship to the wider situation is one of trying to galvanise trade union activity so that we can drag the Labour Party kicking and screaming back to where it should be. I want to remind people of a motion that was passed at the TUC Congress, because there has been some developments on that. For those of you who have perhaps not forgotten it, because we tend to, don't we, when motions are passed at conferences, they don't always ring true in relationship to the movement doing anything about it. But it was motion 69, if anybody wants to give it a Google at any point, and it was carried at the September Trade Union Congress. The opening paragraph, it was entitled New Deal for Workers Mobilisation Strategy. It came from the CWU with an amendment from the NEU. The opening paragraph states it has never been more important in the history of our movement for this generation of trade union leaders and all trade unions to campaign and take action together in pursuit of shared industrial and political demands. And it pretty much ends up with the penultimate paragraph in saying that we will build a social movement in support of the New Deal campaign by engaging community and appropriate national membership organisations. Now, what the TUC were tasked with doing was drawing up a strategy by October of last year, and I've been banging on my General Secretary's door in relationship to what's happening with that, because October last year is long gone. Well, the TUC General Council met last week, and the report that we've had is that the General Council is fully behind a mobilisation of trade unions, and that there should be an event, a rally or an event of some kind. And I think it's likely to be towards the end of May, the beginning of June. It was, the motion actually said spring. We've gone past that. The idea was, and I'm hoping it will still be the case, that there will be a series of regional sort of town hall type meetings to build for that national demonstration. I mean, on top of that, the sort of things that we've been talking about is the need to galvanise local campaigns that are taking place, not just to have a rally in and of itself, because we've seen that in past history, haven't we? The TUC goes out and does a march under some duress from below, and that's the end of it. We've done what we need to do, and it gets forgotten about. When I look at my own borough, I live in Haringey. We've got a UCU dispute. We've got a universal credit campaign. We've got the London Renters campaign out in the streets. We've got campaigns in support of the hospitals. We just before Christmas we had a keep our streets safe women's march, which is still continuing. And of course, for those that are aware of what's going on in London, there's an incinerator, a massive incinerator being built in Edmonton, covering 7 boroughs, and there's a huge campaign going. I'll say a huge campaign. There's a campaign going on. I think that campaign needs to be broadened. What we've have had in Tottenham is a march over that incinerator. But what we haven't done is we haven't coordinated the individual component parts of each of those seven boroughs. So part of this campaign that the trade unions need to get involved in needs to link all those disputes and all those campaigns together, because what we're seeing is a lot of individual campaigns, a lot of individual disputes taking place, but nobody's actually pulling those together and directing it in the same place. I think it was Mark and Harry both said, yes, we can motivate our members to take strike action because inflation is running at about 7%, but that's not going to solve the problem that's caused people to go out in the streets in the first place. And of course, when we start talking about, the youth are probably more interested in things like the environment. So if you don't sort that out, they won't have any jobs and we won't have a planet. So we've got to find a way as a movement, and using the trade union movement to galvanise all those activities and actually push for some real change. So they're the sorts of discussions we're having in the CWU. I understand the TUC has committed itself, whether that's Dave Ward pulling them kicking and screaming into that direction. Apparently they're all on board now. We've got to realise that and make sure it happens, but not just an end in and of itself. It needs to be the beginning of something real. Because look, the reality of it is, I don't think any of us, and some of us have been around a long time, have seen a situation, a crisis that's facing us in the way that it has now, particularly when you look at the climate situation. We have got to do something now within the coming months and years to make some real change for our kids and our grandkids. So that's me. Thanks very much.
I just wanted to remind comrades that that we had a discussion. I can't remember exactly when it was, but towards the tail end of last year, we had a discussion, and the title was, "Will there be a winter of discontent?" And there actually is a winter of discontent now. And although there aren't any big national unions, the UCU strikes, the 10 days of strikes that Chris Robinson mentioned, are really an exception to that. But in the NEU and in the NHS and local authorities, there aren't any big national strikes. And one of the reasons is because of this threshold. It's disappointing that the NEU survey only got a quarter of the members responding. But having said that, at a local level, where it's individual schools or academies that are in dispute, invariably the teacher unions or the local authority unions get well over the 50% threshold, and very often they're involved in successful strikes. And the same applies to a certain degree to other public sectors. I noticed yesterday or the day before, Northern Ireland, the RCN, had a vote, and the Royal College of Nurses, and they because it's a smaller union, it's a relatively small region, they got well over the 50% threshold, and they got a huge proportion of members voting against the miserable 3% pay offer. But if you leave aside these national unions, which are kind of struggling to get past the threshold, at least at a national level, there are all dozens and dozens of small local disputes taking place. And if you look at the Unite website, you can see, you can see 2 or 3 or 4 press releases which are new every single day. And the majority of them, by the way, aren't in the public sector. They're in the private sector, the bus companies, the transportation companies, the small factories, and the industries like this. So there is a winter of discontent, without any doubt. And it's not down to somebody's plan. It's not down to somebody scheming and conspiring. It's down to the fact that millions of workers are sitting up and saying, well, we just can't manage anymore. We've got to have better wages. We can't exist on what we've got. We can't survive on a 2% or a 1% pay award. And that's the reason why these things are happening. The pity is, of course, that those who aren't in unions, like workers on benefits and pensioners and the like, haven't got that kind of industrial muscle to be able to fight for themselves. But I don't think we should be under any illusion as to how severe this squeeze on living standards is. I mean, I'm not going to repeat what's already been said. It's unprecedented in decades, this squeeze on living standards. Now, the shift in trade union militancy isn't an end in itself. It's not going to solve the problems. It's not going to change society. But for me, it's a marvelously positive thing because it shows that people are prepared to fight, they're prepared to struggle, they're prepared to do something. Now, that has got to have a reflection at some point. It's inevitably going to have a reflection at some point in politics as well. It's not going to be a simple matter, of course, because the Labour Party leadership is so bad, so poor. They would be perfectly happy not to have any unions affiliated. They'd perfectly happy not to have any members, and they'd live on corporate donations and state funds and things like that. So it's a complicated process. It will be complicated. But nevertheless, all of this struggle that you can see taking place, this winter of discontent, it will reflect itself in politics. And if it's happening on a big scale now, and it is, imagine what it's going to be like in a few months' time. We'll not be looking at a winter of discontent, but a spring of discontent, a big spring of discontent. And I think it's good. It's not before time that this is actually happening. And I'm looking forward to the fact that this will produce some changes inside the party. Hopefully, changes for the better.
Just go through people's points. That was very interesting to me about the NEU and the tactics. You can never, from the outside, it's very difficult to tell what's going on. I think we have to pay tribute to the NEU though, because I'm a biomedical scientist, and their use of Section 44 to close the schools probably saved 60,000 lives in the first wave of the pandemic, because the cases and deaths were doubling every week. So closing a week earlier, when we had 60,000 dead instead of 120,000. Like the teachers, the pay in the NHS is not negotiated. It's a weird thing. A lot of our reps don't even understand this. It's an award from the pay review body. It's some group of professors who complete fake. The government appoint them, the government give evidence to them, the government decide which the recommendations to accept. It's all incredibly convoluted, but I think the point is the Tories have dammed up one outlet for things, which is the big national strikes, but people coming through other ways with the small local strikes. We ran a strike ballot of 11 people. We got 11 people voting to strike. The employer caved in and gave them an offer they couldn't refuse. All that happens underneath the radar. And also, Louise's point about non-union workers, I think that's very important for the unions to bear in mind. Too often, the right-wing unions especially end up fighting over members between each other when there's whole armies of people out there who need trade unions. Great examples of the care sector, but no one's really gone near care. I think it employs more people than the NHS, actually. According to Sharon Graham, it does. Anyway, there's 1 million of us in the NHS. She says there's 2 million people in care work, and the things that go on in care homes, I could give you some right horror stories, but there's not time to do it. On Unite disaffiliating, I agree with Ray. Sharon herself has a syndicalist tinge, and she's really had nothing to do with the Labour Party structures on the way up, whereas Len was part of it, his political officer in Merseyside. But there's a lot of people in the, commanding or the activist stratum of Unite and the NEC, and that's their thing, the Labour Party, and they go off to the conferences and vote. There's a lot of I feel disappointed with our political people sometimes, that they just go and do what Tulo says. But when we get to it, in reply to Steve Jones' point, I was at the Unite conference when Sharon Graham and Dave Ward spoke at the Fringe about the future, and it more or less is what Steve told us about. But also they said that Tulo's had its day. The Tulo has operated like a prison, really, where Unison and GMB have imprisoned Unite and CW onto rotten policies. They all ended up voting for the 11 plus, for instance, in 2019. That was a funny one, but lots of us went down to Unite delegation and said, "What are you doing?" And then Unite withdrew from the Tulo block voting, except on key, a few key issues like EU. The Unite ballots. One of the officers told me that she'd run 12 ballots, and not a single one came to a strike. In each case, the employer said, "There you go." And if you take the Liverpool docks, where we do have contact, the mood was there, and the company had to work hard to get a yes vote, and went through by about 10, 20 votes, I think. So next year, there'll be a coming back to the table, I think. And that's indicative, isn't it, that it looked like at that time inflation was 2% and they got 4%. So United Labour Party, where it could come ahead with Unite is there's about maybe just less than a dozen excellent MPs got put in by Unite through negotiations with Corbyn. I think it was Zara Sultana, Ian Byrne, Dan Carden, there's others. They kind of the jewel in the crown of Unite's political structure. They do a good job, they do a good job. Mandelson's put them on notice. If there's boundary changes, they'll probably manipulate them out of existence. If they manipulated all of them out of existence, lead to a lot of questions in Unite. On the trade unions, there's this figure that came up. Now, where did I hear this? I think it's in National Officers Report. Unite has lost 8% of its members overall, but in the workplaces where we have recognition, our membership's gone up by 33%. So that's really, the loss is in the sectors that got damaged by COVID, but in the sectors where the union's running ballots, like the buses or, all the sectors which are active, the membership's gone up by 33%. So there's a mixed picture, which it kind of shows that if you have a go, people respond to it. On the confused movements, which was mentioned by Mark, I think it's Greg Oxley from La Riposte made the point in France with the yellow jackets. The trade union's been, he said, it's like a fighter's been punched and battered. They're clinging onto the ropes. There's no fight left in them. But the petty bourgeois layers haven't had that experience. They were just organised themselves around the yellow jackets and became a force to be reckoned with. And I think he did argue strongly that the trade unions in France shouldn't shun that movement. They had to participate in it and win it over to a left-wing and socialist point of view, which in the end did happen. But we are going to see a lot of confused movements. I think the Canadian truckers movement is out and out reactionary. It's funded by American billionaires. But at the bottom level, take out our union. a lot of people who work in construction are bogus self-employed. So in one sense, they may regard themselves as self-employed. I don't need a union. There's a good story from one of our construction organisers on a building site, and a crane driver said, I don't need a union, I'm self-employed. So our organiser said, do you own that crane, mate, that you're driving? No. Do you own the equipment? No, he just turned up, worked in the crane, and thought he was self-employed. And it did hit home. But so the bottom level of the self-employed, they merge very closely with the working class, don't they? But I think we have seen the danger of the unions being constrained by trading laws. And the main thing that constrains the unions is the sort of self-policing of the leaders. They don't, we can't do that. That's their first reaction. Always looking for a compromise. Get it off my desk. There's that outlook. And in those circumstances, it sometimes can be quite dangerous that other elements can come to lead. So I remember the 2009 Lindsay oil strike. That did start off as at least half a strike to get the Portuguese electricians off the site at Lindsay Oil. And it was the comrades, ex-militant comrades and People's Socialist Party went into that dispute and did win it over quite. It wasn't that difficult to win it over to a proper trade union point that is trade union rights for all. And I think that was the Lindsay Oil dispute. I mean, the SWP said, don't get involved, it's a racist strike. Can't do that. You have to find a way to reach the workers and win them over. On labour shortages mentioned by Harry, in the NHS, for instance, every skilled occupation has massive shortages. It must take real genius to achieve that. Midwives, physiotherapists, biomedical scientists, the colleges aren't training enough people. And also what's changed is, say for paramedic, people used to come in and train as a paramedic and be paid and go to day release. Now they make the young people go off to university, do a 3-year course and £9,000 a year, and then come in with a £27,000 debt and do a 1-year conversion. So it throws all the cost of the training onto young people. So they're naturally looking around and saying, what else can I do where I don't have to pay this? For Steve, I mean, I've got my notes of what Dave Ward and Sharon Graham said at the Fringe meeting. And I won't do the whole thing, but here's Dave Ward. We've got a lot in common with Unite. The movement's in crisis. There's no help comes to the Labour Party with no option but to build our strength, collective strength, and organise. We want a new deal for working people. We want branches to link with food banks, renters, etc. We don't need politicians to assert common bargaining agendas. So don't need politicians that slice syndicalists, isn't it? We've got to cooperate better. Here's Sharon. She says, if you take us and PCS and CW, we're in all 9 key areas of the economy. The politicians have failed. If Corbyn wanted it been easier, but that's not going to happen. We're not giving blank checks to Starmer. We'll spend our money widening the workplaces, use the workplace to drive politics. It's all that, which is all coming to be in this TUC campaign. So that's quite encouraging if the TUC can be won over to what Sharon and Dave Ward were saying in October at the Unite conference. Unison, Paul Holmes, we could go into it in great depth, but I just say Unison, the campaign to change Unison is not about one person, and Unison is tottering of falling over into the left. That'll be a big problem for Starmer, and that's why they're doing all these manoeuvres. They expelled a young girl from Socialist Appeal from Labour Party, so she can't take part of the Unison political structures, and that won the Unison political committee over to the right wing by 1 vote. That's how desperate they are. And so I think the process, Unite and CWU are affiliated unions which are on the left. The GMB and Unison Usdaw unite in favour of Starmer and expelling Corbyn and all that crap. They're so bureaucratic. But Unison is tottering and changing. And Dave Ward made an interesting point at that Fringe meeting that the election of Sharon Graham the lessons will not be lost on the general secretaries. They cannot carry on with business as usual. And even the new guy in GMB has made some noises, hasn't he, about Labour councils, their atrocious behaviour. So I think we still come back to, don't we, that the unions have to be a key area for us to take notice of and intervene where we can.